This is the Business of Apps podcast, bringing you actionable insights from the leaders of the global app industry and the world's fastest growing apps. You can find more app news, data and analysis over at businessofapps.com.
Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. On this show, we invite app industry professionals to cover various topics, and we promise to do our best to keep it both insightful but brief. If you haven't subscribed to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or other podcast platforms where you can find us, I strongly encourage you to do that. Once you subscribe, you will be getting episodes of this show on your device as soon as it's available. In this episode, we have Mike Rhodes, founder and CEO at ConsultMyApp. Mike, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Hey, great to be on it. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Thank you for coming. This is great. By the way, this is episode 200. We're going through this celebration of this 200th episode, the second anniversary. And yeah, we will be celebrating the 5th year of running the show this coming December. But yeah, 200 episodes. I'm going to set up the stage for this conversation by doing this. So on one of the recent episodes of this podcast, we talked about the app growth, claiming that growth is likely the notion that has been discussed by app marketers the most. It's like wake up any app marketer in the middle of the night and ask her, what is your name? She would tell you growth. And yet, sustainable growth is what excites app marketers and developers even more. I don't think there's anybody who still doesn't know that a project is a marathon, and to run it, you need a sustainable strategy. You need a sustainable growth strategy. So in this episode, we will be talking about the Sustainable Growth Handbook, recently developed by Mike's company, ConsultMyApp. But first, Mike, let's begin with talking about you. Please tell us about your background in tech.
Yeah, sure. So, by the way, Art, you're looking good for 200 episodes of this podcast. still hanging in there.
Doing my best. It's not 200 years, just 200 episodes.
Very useful. My background. So, my background, technically, I'm a computer science grad. So, it was quite a while back now. My sort of early career was really in data and the applications of technology to solve business problems. Now, that was really done in the context of anti-money laundering, counter-terrorist financing, counter-fraud, which was very interesting to an extent. But, you know, I had my eyes opened about 15, 14 years ago when I moved into mobile. I worked for a couple of mobile messaging platform vendors who shall remain nameless, but that sort of was my introduction to mobile, and spent a few years working for them, running a few customer success divisions, and then sort of came to set up ConsultMyApp.
Yeah, that's the really interesting trajectory. You mentioned very interesting fields, and I do have a question. Do you miss those days when you're working, with those jobs which you begin your career with?
Yeah, I mean, all of it is underpinned by data. So whether you're looking to identify, linked fraud groups or criminals,
Yeah.
or looking at how apps are linked together in similar apps, I use the same analytical techniques that I've learned connecting criminals together, I now do to connect apps together. So when we're looking at, making sure you're viewed as a similar app to another app, from a Google Play perspective, very important. We use social network analytics, or SNA, but I'm just applying it to the realm of mobile marketing. So the common thread between all of that stuff in my history has been data, and just finding out how to understand that data and make it actionable is something I've always loved to do, and that's how it sort of all connects together.
Gotcha, Mike. By the way, a bit of attention for those who are listening us into the this conjunction, this field of counteracting criminals using technology. There's a great recent episode of the Verge podcast with a guy who wrote a book about the company that actually was run by FBI for 4 years to provide the messaging service, and actually that way they could tap in conversations of drug dealers around the world. Huge operation, really mind-boggling effort how the FBI could manage to run the company, doing everything you would imagine for a real startup in Silicon Valley, running funding rounds, building the team, everything for 4 years. It's just amazing story.
Incredible.
But get back to our conversation and to the topic of this episode. So tell me about ConsultMyApp. What do you guys do? What services do you provide on the market? And how do you position yourself?
Yeah, so I'll try and give you the lift pitch. So we are a mobile marketing agency and consultancy. So we operate in both ways. One sense, we provide strategic guidance and advice, reports, audits, and so forth for certain clients. And then the other hand, we also deliver those services and have the hands-on keyboards of creative designers, ASO consultants, and so forth. We work across the entire mobile marketing spectrum. So right at the top from acquisition, that's paid and organic. So we have an award-winning. In fact, we're actually ASO Agency of the Year at the moment, according to Business of Apps. So we'll get that plug in.
Yep.
Which we're very, very proud of winning in December. And obviously the paid side. So we have a wonderful paid team that look at, TikTok, Insta, Meta, all of the sort of paid channels, Apple search ads and beyond. Right through to post-acquisition and arguably an equally important area of CRM and comms, as well as UX, UI design, which is really to drive retention, engagement, and ultimately conversion into something that means something. We work with lots of different clients and lots of different industries, from Macy's to Monopoly Go to Bloomingdale's to Papa John's to O2, really big companies, as well as some sort of middling startups like Tide, for instance, really cool business banking brand coming through Europe at the moment. Yes, Tide are doing a great job. And lots of other companies that I could list off, but we have a really broad spectrum of knowledge in our business, and ultimately we're here to make them as good as they possibly can be, and that's by applying the principles of sustainable growth.
Gotcha, Mike. All right, so let's define some basics. How do you define what sustainable growth means for your company, for what you do? Why it's important for developers to focus on this approach?
Yeah, so my background is I'm not one of these, kids that's just been around Silicon Valley and mobile first brands my whole life. My earlier life was in the rather mundane, retail banking, capital markets, wasn't super exciting, but it did ground me in core business principles, and I think these apply to any business, whether you are a sort of startup games publisher, or whether you are a 200-year-old retailer. The principles of sustainable growth apply, and they're very simple. It's about building something that's scalable, because there's no point if you can't scale the thing, because you never grow, and it's not growth. It's got to be repeatable, so we can't just do something 1 week and expect in 3 or 4 weeks we're gonna have to do something different, because it's not gonna be repeatable, and it's got to be profitable. So it's actually got to make some money. It's got to yield more than you're putting into it. And that yield might not happen in day 1 or day 30, not even in month 2. It might be month 6, 7, 8, 9. But ultimately, the yield has got to be higher than whatever you're putting into it. So it's all about being scalable, repeatable, and profitable with your acquisition and engagement strategies.
Gotcha, Mike. I think people's approach, people's attitude towards sustainability in business really ties into their psychology. We all are prone to expect quick results. We're really not that great in planning ahead for a long period of time. So when you're embarking on the app project, this is the effort for every single company. Like, it doesn't matter like the scale of the app, like how many people will be using the app. Well, of course, it will be more important for millions of app users, but it is across the board important to understand from day one, this is your marathon to run. You have to know exactly what you're doing. You have to be patient. You have to be ready for many setbacks. You have to be ready for moments when things will go wrong, when things will go south, and you'll have to handle with those moments. So yeah, you have to embrace the whole package, as they say.
Yeah.
Now, your handbook outlines several key principles of sustainable growth. Which of these principles do you believe are the most critical for long-term success, and why?
So that's an interesting question. I'd like to say they're all equally important, but I think the biggest challenge I think our clients always see is siloed behavior, where acquisition teams don't, and even then in acquisition, you can get organic doesn't talk to paid, but acquisition teams don't talk to CRM and retention teams. And then the data doesn't talk together. Even if the teams do, they're not connecting the dots because they don't have a CDP or a warehouse, and they haven't got a reporting stat that sits on top. And that is the biggest single thing. And actually, I was talking to Arn Nguyen from Volt this morning on another podcast, a webinar, sorry, and he was saying the same thing. Like, he's in his history, and he's got a very great, an amazing background and great experience. The one problem he's always faced is these silos and this challenge of teams not talking together and the data not talking together. I think if you overcome that, actually things start to become a lot easier. So, the biggest I think piece to address has got to be removing silos across the business, and that's data and teams.
Yeah, that's a great point. It brings me to so many episodes I've heard in other podcasts where people were talking about the culture in the company and how it's important, again, from the day one that when you start embarking on your venture to build a company, and it's important on so many levels. It's important how you can manage the crisis when we'll go through which you will be going anyway at some point. And it's important how well you can exchange between the teams, the information flow, what you're just describing, but culture, the team, like how just put it very bluntly, how these people can deal with each other and work as a one team, even though they work in the separate teams, but still they are one team as the company. That's hard to overstate the importance of this notion.
Yeah, absolutely. You can have the best data, best product in the world, but unless you've got product talking with marketing, talking with, and by marketing, I mean both here, acquisition and engagement. Unless you've got these three pieces, product, engagement, acquisition, talking together and communicating with data, it doesn't really matter. Like the product could be amazing, but ultimately you'll never ever be able to sustainably sort of grow that and scale that company. So absolutely, I think removing silos, number one.
Yeah, and that's it's not like it's artificial. It's in a sense it's a kind of a natural effect because these teams, people in these teams, they do very, very different kind of job. Some people are focused on numbers. People in marketing are focused on customers. They better be focused on their emotions, on what benefits they're selling them. They're kind of by definition does not speak the same language. But if you're in charge of this big team and you're putting them together to a single team, you need to find a way to smooth this edges, to find the common language, so to speak, for these people to be a one team. So yeah, that's not easy, but you have to do it. Absolutely.
And it's a great way of understanding. Like essentially, all of the people's jobs in products depends on acquisition and CRM. All the people's jobs in acquisition depends on product and CRM. The people's jobs in CRM, the success of their jobs depends on product and acquisition. Because quite simply, if you start, let's say I'm an acquisition manager and I start buying really cheap traffic from, some server farm in the Far East, that's going to look great. My CPIs will be really low. Oh, look at that, I'm acquiring users at 20p an install. It's going to kill my CRM team because the retention will be awful because they aren't valid users, they're bots or cheap traffic. So it's really going to ruin and harm their success as a CRM team. You can't work with really bad traffic. And conversely, I could be doing a great job at acquisition and be really happy. Oh well, my CPI seem fine, and I might have a really bad CRM and retention setup. And I find that I'm just pouring great acquisition into a leaky bucket and it all just goes out. And then actually my CPAs go through the roof because I'm not keeping hold, or the CRM team aren't successfully keeping hold of those users long enough to convert them. And then the product team, they ultimately control everything, because if the app keeps crashing every 6 seconds, it doesn't really matter how good your acquisition is or how good your CRM setup is. The product's going to break all the time. You're going to lose all those people. The product team but they also need good acquisition and good engagement to utilize the product properly. So they're really interdependent. You can't be great at any one of those areas without being mindful of what's happening in the other two.
Exactly. Now, how should app developers balance user acquisition on one hand and user retention on the other to ensure sustainable growth? Are there any specific strategies or metrics you would recommend focusing on?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, in the idealist world, you spend an equal amount of time on both. That actually isn't correct, and it doesn't work in reality. Of course, you are at a bit of a dilemma in that you could say, well, there's no point in filling a leaky bucket, so let's make sure the bucket isn't leaky before we switch on acquisition. The problem is you can't fix the bucket without people in there to know where the holes are in the first place. So you've got to balance it. And what I always say to our clients is, look, you're going to have to accept some natural leakage and wastage on acquisition, but do not switch acquisition on full flow until you're happy with the setup on the product and the sort of engagement and retention side. And that means that you will spend at a reasonable level, sort of low to medium levels, just to generate traffic to optimize the product and the engagement strategy. You don't want to ramp that up. It's just there to do that. And we do that really successfully with a sleep app at the moment, where we're just acquiring users ultimately for testing purposes. Yes, some of them will convert, but it's not really about making tons of money off the app right now. It's just about making sure it's as good as it can get to from a product and engagement perspective, because once that's done, we'll ramp up the acquisition and then we start to reap the benefits of it. So I think it's retention first to an extent. That has to be where your focus is going to be full on, but you've got to spend some money on acquisition to get the data and the people in there to really validate what you're doing from a retention perspective.
It a bit reminds me of the situation when you're climbing up, you're making sure you're grabbing the rock with one hand really nicely, and you move your other hand up and do the same thing with the left hand, just making sure you're not going to fall down when you're not holding very firmly, but the other hand, you keep moving up.
Exactly. That's a great rock climbing analogy there. I've not heard that one, but yeah, it's pretty much like that.
Okay, so and data plays a significant role in the Sustainable Growth Handbook. Can you share some insights or examples of how data-driven decisions can lead to sustainable growth for an app?
Yes, there's a few good examples. One is how product data feeds back to acquisition. And by the way, sustainable growth is all about the combination of acquisition, engagement, and product. So just in case anyone's not sure, it's those three areas we're trying to tie together. And you can read the handbook and download it off our website, should anyone want to. So TikTok. So TikTok and one of our sleep apps that I mentioned before. One of the things we were doing, I talked about it being a bit of a test bed where we were sort of testing things, but we weren't just testing product, we were also testing the efficacy of TikTok ads. So we had some user-generated content. Our content marketing team had already built a plan as to what the say actors, but the influencers, the users that are building the UGC on TikTok were going to actually record for us. So we started off with something quite generic, and we fed that in, and we started to look at what happened in the product. From that, we got an understanding for which features of the product people were mostly using, which ones were they really engaging with, and which ones just weren't resonating at all. So we created a feedback loop. We then said, right, let's build our scripts for the content around the features that are really appealing here. And it sort of starts to amplify things. We did that. And then we find actually we're getting far higher conversion and engagement rates off the back of it, because people are responding better to our ads because they are reflective of the features that people used in the first place. So a great example there of how we fed product data to improve our TikTok videos. So that's a nice example. Another example could be where we customize the onboarding journey. So this is how we impact engagement with acquisition data. So knowing that you're acquiring a user from TikTok, just because we're talking about that for argument's sake, versus a user you may have acquired through, let's say, I don't know, the Telegraph newspaper, an ad placement that was there. They're going to be different demographics. You know, a user from TikTok is likely to be under 30. User from the Telegraph likely to be over 40. That's obviously a generalization, but it does hold for majority of the traffic. You can actually adapt your onboarding journey to be more youthful targeted. So you might even adapt the UX slightly, because you know people that are a younger generation be used to certain UX elements and styles and flows, and change that for an older generation, maybe slightly larger buttons, slightly larger text, simplified UX. You know, but adapting the tone of voice, the style of language that you're using to them, to really mimic the sort of age. And it's a simple demographic trait and age, but with age, you can do some enhancements to your onboarding that are going to resonate better with someone on average under 30 versus someone on average that's over 40. So figuring out where people have come from is really important to onboard, customizing that onboarding journey. Another example might be you've got a campaign running that's advertising something to do with the Premier League or football, and then you may have a campaign that's advertising something related to tennis. Now, when I hit the app, if this is a sports streaming app, for instance, I want to see how good this is for watching the football on, and I get live scores and this. And if I've come through a tennis campaign, when I've installed the app, I want to see how interesting it is for tennis. Like, what tournaments do they cover? What channels have they got? I don't want to see stuff about football on my tennis, and I don't want to see stuff about tennis. So really adjusting your onboarding journey has a massive, massive impact, and I can't understate that on the conversion rate from install to your first key objective. Might be registration, sign up, deposit, payment, whatever it is. That we've seen that make, you know, significant differences from anywhere from like 15 to 30% odd. And conversely, to give you some stats on the TikTok, we dropped the CPI by 63% on that by feeding product data back into the acquisition. So two powerful metrics that, you know, don't require that much, that much work. You just need to think about it in that sort of holistic product acquisition engagement way.
Right. So acquiring data about how the app is being used and fitting to your advertising campaign to find this right balance between basically finding the right language to approach the people you're trying to communicate your app to, and making sure you're relevant. I know these things sound simple and obvious, but it's extremely important to communicate with the audience using the language they understand, that resonate with them. And yeah, like you're saying, greeting people in your app with the content they're expecting, ideally visually look and feel the way they like it. That's not easy fit, given how many cohorts you should build, like how many people are using your app with the different personalities, different habits, different lifestyles, etc. So that's really tough thing to do, but this is the way to grow your app. This is one of the basic.
It is. And you don't have to start off with hyper personalization. You can start with literally just looking at the campaigns and have, maybe you're running 10, 20, 50 campaigns. I don't know. But, that's a finite number of segments that you can customize your onboarding for. You could even literally just do it in 2 or 3 ways. So you don't have to go all out from day one to every single micro segment. You could just do it for a small number, even try it for 2 or 3 campaigns. You could do it by channel, even simpler, than 2 or 3 different channels you treat differently. Those, these are not too overwhelming to start with. And as you see results from that, then you can decide whether to invest further time and effort into getting into the smaller segments. But, just personalizing on even a highly granular level is still worth doing.
Gotcha. Now, mistakes. People do mistakes. This is just the way it is. What are some common pitfalls and mistakes you see app developers make that hinder sustainable growth? And how can these be avoided?
It's an interesting one, because app developers generally speaking, are pretty good, at building a product. If they've got the right brief and whatever. It's not, I think that from an app developer perspective, I would say maybe the common pitfall is misconfiguring like the MMP or the customer engagement platform, so they're not capturing the right events, or they're sending the wrong events. So that's the common thing that I think that they do wrong. But ultimately, you could argue that's not their fault. They just haven't been given the correct specification. I think the biggest issue is not with developers, but actually with the product marketers. And that comes when the wrong metrics are really being focused on as sort of OKRs or KPIs. So things like installs, category ranking, the keyword ranking, these things are vanity metrics. They don't really matter. Like how many MAU, it doesn't matter to a large intent. What does matter is the users I've got. How are they converting? How are they converting into meaningful users? That might be dollar purchase. It might be watching ads. It might be, whatever your core metric is. But ultimately, it's got to be understand that is the metric. It's about making that value greater than what you're spending on it. And like I said, it doesn't happen in day one. Might not happen in 6 months. It may have to wait 12 or 15 months to start seeing the return on it. But ultimately, that is what your metric is, making the return, usually in monetary value, higher than the money you're putting in. So talking of installs, category rankings, DAUs, MAUs, it's largely irrelevant. And we massively steer away from those conversations because they do not alone make a successful app that is powered by sustainable growth.
All right, here comes the crystal ball question. Looking ahead, what trends or innovations do you foresee impacting sustainable app growth? And how should app developers prepare for these changes?
Yeah, I think the big one, and you'll probably get this answer from most people, is the reduction in first and third-party data, because of all the privacy restrictions that, are getting implemented. Exactly. I know it's not nothing exciting or crazy, but I genuinely think that's the biggest trend and thing that's causing most people headaches, developers and marketers. And really, the solution to that, to an extent, has to be zero-party data. So, if you need to know something about someone, ask them, make it clear that you're asking them for the purpose of using it in segmentation or tailoring the app to their needs. So, and developers obviously can start to build those preference centers, those questionnaires, those capture forms, whatever it happens to be, to capture that zero-party data. And I think that, to me, is because it's explicitly captured with the purpose of you using it, what you need to use it for. That, to me, has got to be one of the big things that people need to start thinking about. And it doesn't have to be millions of attributes. It could literally be, giving me your rough age or your favorite football team. It takes 2 seconds, click, done. That gives you tons and tons of information, more than just being a random anonymous, user. So that, I think, is the big thing. The reduction in first and third party data got to be solved by capturing more zero party data.
Okay, gotcha. So yeah, this is hopefully they will help developers and marketers to keep their apps growth in the future and overcome this debacle that has been going on for a few years. And basically coming back to this, very fundamental notion, know your customers. Like, every marketer should start with this notion, doesn't matter in what field he or she is. Now, the next question comes for people who are in the field for a while, who definitely have something to say. And Mike, looking at the app marketing as a whole, what would you like to change about it the most?
If you asked me this 3 years ago, I would say I'd like people to stop focusing on acquisition above all else. And now, if you ask me that, I actually think it's generally changing. I'm hearing people using the word sustainable growth, profitability, scalability, things that just weren't really sexy or vogue terms, a few years back. It's boring, but it's successful. So, thankfully, and we've always been, CMA, we are just that way inclined. We just think about data and doing things correctly, which might not be overnight successes, but I guarantee that 9 times out of 10 they will be successful. It's the sort of the unstructured flash in the pan. Hey, look at me! I've just spent $10 million in 3 weeks. I'm now number one in the category. That sort of mentality has thankfully died out. So I got to say, actually, I'm really, really positive and optimistic about the app marketing space now. I see lots of people in there that are now more mature in marketing sense and parlance, and really thinking about these things the way I do, and that to me is wonderful. So, do I want to change anything? No, not at all right now. I think things are heading in the right direction. And I'm really, really optimistic about what the future has to hold. I think the dark, cloudy, black box years of, yesterday have gone, and I think we're now in a much more open, transparent, and metric focused environment where people actually care about, building something that ultimately is profitable and it's run like a traditional business.
Got it, Mike. Okay, that was actually the last question, the first part of the show. And for every new guest, I always do the same thing. I cut out like 10, 15 minutes of the episode to ask a few quick questions. So people who are listening to us have a chance to know my guests a little bit better. So here we go, just a few quick questions. What smartphone do you use now? Are you been switching between these two big platforms or staying one side all the time?
So I'm an Android through and through because I'm techie geeky, tend to be Android users. However, I was about to say I've always been Android. I actually haven't always been Android. My first phone wasn't an Android and it wasn't an iOS, and that's how old I am. It was a Samsung Galaxy, Samsung D600 it was. And I don't know what operating system it had in it, but it was something legacy, but it was a flip phone. So I actually predate all of that. My first proper smartphone, though, really was the iPhone 3GS, I think. Now, at that point, I was an iPhone lover because it was the first one. It really was pioneering. Then it got stolen in Clapham, so I had to go and look for another one. I wasn't, I was an intern, so a placement student from uni, so I wasn't getting paid very much. So I had to go and buy myself an Android. And ever since, I've just loved Android. I got a Galaxy, and I was like, "Oh, these are pretty good." And I've been not just an Android user, a Samsung Galaxy user now for forever, really.
Gotcha, Mike. Okay. So imagine you left your home and for whatever reason you forgot your smartphone inside. You're out. What is the most amazing feature for you would be?
Spotify, music. I can't live without music. I'd have to go and find somewhere that's playing some music. But I'm a trained musician historically, and I can't. For me, music is essential in life, so I wouldn't want to live without that.
Gotcha. All right. Imagine there's a chance that some new feature can be introduced to your smartphone, hardware, software, both. Not necessarily something that is trendy that you can read about online, but if you can think about something for you specifically, what would make that device more useful tool for you?
Contact lenses with the embedded screen. That's going to be the thing that will unlock the metaverse and augmented reality. It will allow me not to have to hold a bloody phone in my hand all the time. That to me is the technology that for some unbeknownst reason we should have, but we don't have yet. And I know companies have tried and failed, but once that's nailed, that's going to be an absolute game changer. Once contact lenses are fitted with screens and overlays, that's going to be a whole new world at that point. Everybody will have always on access to their screens and devices. You'll have a lot of use for the metaverse, a lot of use for augmented reality. Till that happens, the rest of it is just useless. Like I don't have any interest in metaverse and wearing a pair of goggles or glasses. Give me a contact lens, however, then you've got me hooked. And I think that's going to be in the next 10, 15 years, that will be a real game changer for society as a whole.
Yeah, it actually reminds me the attitude of one of my favorite podcasters who says, there's a very strong anthropological notion that anything you can wear on your face does not increase your chances to find a mate. to find somebody to talk to and to be liked by the person. So yeah, holding a phone in your pocket, that's one thing, a watch on your wrist, but something on your face is not increasing your chances to, deal with somebody. So
No, well, absolutely. Maybe some people want that, to be honest.
could be. Yeah, you never know.
Yeah.
But I totally get you. Yeah, the lenses will be really great. Not only for if you're agent, just Ethan Hawke from Mission Impossible, but real person from the street.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
Okay, before I let you go, very, very final question. How can people get in touch with you and get more information about what you do?
Sure. Well, we have offices, central London, on Bishopsgate in Heron Tower. Giant fish tank in reception. We'd love to see that. By the way, that isn't our fish tank. It's Salesforce that have most of the floors there. We just happen to inhabit some of the space. You can get ConsultMyApp.com. We've got a great blog on there. LinkedIn, we tend to throw a lot of content out, but if you want to get hold of me, just hit me up on LinkedIn. Like, that is the easiest way, surefire way of getting my attention. Because I'm an avid user and I do like the thing. And as far as social networks go, it's probably my favorite.
Cool. Mike, thank you so much for being on the podcast and spending time with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Cheers out.
Cheers. And that was Mike Rhodes, founder and CEO at ConsultMyApp. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. Remember, we release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe and you'll be getting episodes of this show on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Business of Apps podcast. For more, head on over to businessofapps.com.